Welcome to Next Mountain Podcast, where we meet exited founders and leaders who are turning their transition into purpose and impact. In today's special episode, we are turning our focus to Next Mountain's co-founder, France Montpetit. France is a serial founder of digital companies working at the intersection of media, education, technology, and notably in the field of regenerative agriculture. For over 20 years, Marie built and launched successful ventures across various sectors, including publishing, digital products, online courses, and SaaS platforms. A storyteller at heart, she has built brands through thoughtful brand strategy, leveraging business models that engage both local and international markets. Throughout her career, Marie-France has chartered her own path, guided by a vision for a more life-sustaining society and culture. In this episode, we will explore Marie-France's journey from her chosen school of life, traveling and working across the world, to her multiple entrepreneurial endeavors. And we will speak exit and how she navigated her own post-exit challenges, leading her to the vision for Next Mountain. So without further ado, let's get started. So Marie-France, welcome to Next Mountain.
Thank you.
So happy to be here with you. So today we're going to discuss for our audience who you are, what you've been through, and why we're here together in building Next Mountain.
Great. Looking forward to it.
So taking into account our audience, exited entrepreneurs that are curious about what's coming next in their journey, how would you like to introduce yourself to them?
Well, my name is Marie-France Montpetit, or Marie-France Montpetit. I'm a French-Canadian, Québécoise.
Mm-hmm.
I describe myself, I'm serial founder, entrepreneur. I really have a typical background and journey in terms of entrepreneurship.
You mean atypical, right?
Atypical.
Yes, not like atypical. No. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm dedicated to playing a role in what's going on in the world right now and finding my own unique way of doing that. And that's what it brought us together, you and I.
Good. Do you want to share a little bit where you grew up, or where have you traveled? What was part of your education?
So it's interesting. I'm born in Quebec in a small town, youngest of 3 kids, and I always had this very strong sense. There's kind of like a gap between what I was feeling and understanding as true and right and what was shown in the world around me.
Mm-hmm.
And I also had a great opportunity to be privileged of being in a family that reading was really important. My brother and sister and I would read, fairy tales and, fables. So there was always a view of like this sense of something that's important and real and good and true and beautiful. And at the same time, what was shown around me, and I, grew up in the 80s and 90s. And so I was always dreaming about another world and somewhere out there and what was out in the world. I did, my studies. Eventually I started college in arts and literature. And then I met some very countercultural people. Some people might call them hippies, and and going into the woods and taking mushrooms, and so I went. So basically, I around the age of 19, 20, I dropped out through my studies, and I went and followed my instinct and my intuition and went out traveling in Asia, and I ended up spending a couple of years in India. So basically I kind of dropped out of normal mainstream society for a few years, and I was a vegetarian. I only wore like white linen clothes and had dreadlocks, and my parties were hanging out with people in the park and doing potlucks. And so I was in this very alternative lifestyle for my formative years. But I was already, in a way, I was never motivated by money, but I was always taking action or always finding what's a role I can play in the communities I was part of and what could be useful, and taking initiatives, even if it's, oh, let's get together and do this, or taking different, making stuff happen, basically. And eventually I start feeling that I had to rejoin mainstream society, because I felt that like I didn't want to live in a bubble, you know? And I was seeing what was going on in the world around me and I wanted to be part of it. It's like, well, I can't be with like my 10 friends living in the woods or in India or whatever while the rest of the world is going this totally other direction. I felt intuitively that I wanted to take part in it. So basically I moved back to Montreal at that point, and I was training in a Thai yoga massage school
Mm-hmm.
before, and I was playing a bit with Photoshop, and the teacher was this great Asian man. He was very charismatic and motivated, and I was like, oh, their poster was really ugly, and I said, I'll make a nicer poster, and he was like, oh, that's great, now make the next one. And then one thing led to another, and it was the early social media, and I before I knew, I had my first job doing marketing, and I discovered that I can I'm able to sense what people want to see and hear, what make people tick, and what. So through that, and then I was around other people who were around different my friends were also starting entrepreneur ventures around healthy foods, and I was part of emerging movements and things. And then I did all kinds of different stuff, like I worked in restaurants, I worked in events, I was a promoter, I was and then I was freelance, I was doing a lot of different things. But through and then I learned how to build websites, and I helped my friends who were life coaches and yoga teachers and all this stuff. So that's kind of like the baseline, which started my practice in terms of marketing. And that's the first time around that age, between late 20s, that's where I was first exposed to the idea that business could be a force for good in the world. And that's where I started reading like Seth Godin and those kinds of people talk about the power of tribe, and the first 1,000 true fans. And it was also like social media was coming up, so it was creating these opportunities for that.
So, from a little girl in a town dreaming of changing the world,
Yeah.
traveling to all these places, and I sense that entrepreneurship has had a key role throughout this journey. Do you want to speak more about that? What was
Yeah.
your first transaction? What did you sell first?
Well, it's funny. I think the first thing I actually sold were I was crafting like hemp necklaces,
Yeah.
and and selling them to my friends. But actually, even without, for me, it was never about the transaction. It was about the initiative. It's about going first, and especially because I could be actually pretty introverted, and getting this contradiction, this tension between, like, I see, like, I have this sense of something that wants to take place or wants to, so having this instinct of wanting to take initiative or suggest something, but at the same time feeling like the risk, the social risk, or and I've never been someone who like leadership, as defined as having power over other people, was not attractive to me at all. I had never were driven to, like, be the boss or anything like that.
And so, throughout these experiences, um, in across all these countries and different communities, what is it that you learn? What is it that you keep with you today?
Well, I think it's really following your gut, I think, and knowing where you're coming from. And I think that's something we don't talk too much about, but like knowing, like, where you're coming from and being able to get back to that, on a regular basis, um like what's important to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think also being resourceful is something that, so I didn't get to, and we'll talk about some of more visible accomplishment I had later
Mm-hmm.
on, but everything I learned through doing, and through like trying to fiddle with things, and of course I chose fields that allowed me to do that. Like, I wouldn't go into like biomedical research, or there's certain fields I recognize that you can't just learn by doing in everything. But for me, it was just like learning, fiddling how to build a website. And I remember, like, in early 2010s or 2005, like fiddling on HTML in MySpace,
Yes.
and things like that, and trying to figure it out. And so So that's one thing. And then the other thing, being resourceful, and then just learning through doing and trusting that there's something that's driving me, that's actually, there's something greater than myself that's operating. Or and it may seem like almost esoteric to say, like, oh,
Hmm.
something bigger than me at play, but
Yeah.
so yeah.
And when you came back,
Yeah.
so to Montreal,
Yeah.
you were feeling you were in this bubble, and you wanted to come back. Was there a calling? What was the reason behind that?
Well, there's a and there was different stages and different phases, and I also lived in California for a little bit, and I was involved in different groups and different people. But it was basically like, I think in a way I did the opposite journey of a lot of people. A lot of people,
Yeah.
like, first they pursue like traditional conventional success, externally defined success, and then eventually, like, they get disillusioned, or they attain something, but then they're like, well, I got all this stuff, why am I not happy? And for me, and then it's like, what is it about these other more you know countercultural, or alternative lifestyles and philosophies that could appeal to me, or that could be more meaningful? And for me, I went the other way, which is like, I went like out of the mainstream first, but then it was like this feeling of like, I need to be part of the world. I cannot live aside. I need to take part whatever's going on. And I think a lot of people now, but even back then, have this sense of like, there's big changes coming up, there's things that are emerging, and it's through technology and the social, and there's new worlds that is coming about. And I don't know how to explain, but I felt like I had to take part
Hmm.
in the world. And then of course, like, the other part, which is like, we live in this world. I'm a pragmatic person, you know and even if you're not driven by money, you have to accept that,
Some
we live.
needs are important.
Some things are important. And it was there was also a really important learning I had at some point. I had like a mentor that I respected a lot, and it was someone who lived, such a peaceful life and was very content. But one of the things he said, and I remember at that time, I realized that all these negative concepts about money, and 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 I think a lot of people that live in countercultural, or healers, or have those ideas that money is the source of all evil and this kinds of stuff. And I remember he said, well, money is just like anything else in the world,
Hmm.
and it's like learning how to bake a cake, it's like learning how to build a house, it's like learning. It's just, it doesn't have any specific, there's no substance to it that's different than other things. And I remember that kind of opened my mind to be like, huh, could I learn, like, the ways of the world, in that way. And I think for me, so at some point I came back to live in Montreal, and also at that, I had a partner who was, he was doing like online marketing, coaching programs. And I was like, I so even that business model, understanding a business model, understanding like. And I remember it was pretty funny. It was like, the guy, I was like, what? You have like, he was selling this group coaching program. And I'm like, what? You have like 20 people give you $2,000, and now you're talking to them twice a week on the phone? Like, that's a good deal. So so I had learned some things, and then when I came back to Montreal, and I learned how to design websites, and doing campaigns and things like that, but always from a, not a from a theory, but from a
Practical. Yeah.
practical way. And then I offered my services to the people around me, and I was introduced to, like, oh, we have this, someone introduced me to this guy. He's like, oh, he's got a book, he's a farmer, he talks about
Yes.
farming, agriculture, and he needs a website. He needs help with his website. And yeah, I met him, but right away I saw, actually, we had our first meeting, and rather than pitch him on the website, I said, you should do an online course, and that's what needs to be done, I could do it with you. And because it was emerging, in California at that time, like, it was coming up, and I was in these circles. But I was like, because he already had a best-selling book, he had done, like, I don't know, 200 speaking engagement, and he had like build some momentum around what he was doing. But at first he was like, well, I'm not sure, let's see, and maybe start with the website and we'll figure it out. But also I got emotionally invested and I got involved, and we talked and talked, and then we roped in one of his best friends who was doing the video and photography. So there was even more of an incentive to like, oh, we could do this project, the three of us together. And then that was the beginning of a really interesting entrepreneurial adventure.
Yeah. So tell us more about you are a serial entrepreneur. So from
Yeah.
that business, you started one and then
Yeah.
many others, and you had a lot of success. So can you please explain to us a little bit the
Yeah.
story of that journey?
So we met. I got really involved. When I met him, he was a speaker, author, teacher. But then I'm like, let's do an online course, and that was you know basically to monetize that his teachings and also the attention he was getting. So I spent a year building the online course. I did everything from the website, the product, the platform, the marketing, the campaigns, the launch, the strategy, everything but making the videos and the content. And then we launched it. And also we did a pretty clever, we were just talking about doing it. We started a waiting list on the new website I did. And we had, I think, like, it was literally just online course coming soon, a little like beauty shot video, and sign up to be on a waiting list. And I think we had like 5,000-6,000 people sign up. So for me, it was like a good indicator that there was
Interest.
interest, momentum. So by the time we launched, and I remember we did like a live webinar, and the tools at the time, that's about 10 years ago, and the tools were not that great. Then we even had like uh, a live launch that the video crashed, and then people are texting me like, oh, and I'm like freaking out, and I'm like the de facto CTO of the business. But we bootstrapped it, and then the first year we made about 1.2 million in revenue. And so I went in space of few months to be like a freelancer, marketing girl working with hippies, and not only hippies, but get the gist, to like, okay, now I'm the CEO of this company. And I really, there was this momentum going on, and this, I was doing everything myself. Then suddenly, like, okay, well, now it's too much. I need to hire one person, two people. And then before I know, it's like, now I need to learn how to manage people and structure. But there was a lot of energy and a lot of flow. We had students from all over the world. I think last I counted, it was like 83 countries. People signed up to our online course, and it was also like the purpose of it was really beautiful. It was really to, and that's my former business partner. He represented an idea, and I think that's what I understood is like,
Hmm.
what do you represent is like, it's possible to start a small farm, something that's aligned with your values, and make a decent living out of it. So I think this feeling of a movement that people wanted to join. But also our program itself was a very thorough, well researched, well crafted and designed program, where, because if you imagine yourself like, you quit your job in the city, you're, I
Hmm.
don't know, you're in your, and you say, let's start a small vegetable farm, and you've never done it, it's very complex. So what we were giving them was the recipe of how to do it, in the technical sheet and the videos, and it was like a library of resource and a community that people could join. So that was very, very exciting. And then we had, we had forays into publishing. And at the same time, he became kind of like a TV personality. They did some documentaries with him. So because of that too, it brought a lot of opportunities, visibility. I went to Europe. France was popping up, and so it was a very exciting time. And then through that, we had the opportunity to start a tools and apparel company with other partners. And then also with another partner, we started a software because there was a need. So what really understood is like the idea of like ecosystem, creating a business ecosystem. So it's
Hmm.
not just like, okay, well, you start one business, but you realize that there's different needs that could be served in different ways. And then if you connect them together, then it can build into something that's more relevant, more impactful. And then because the our mission itself was impact. Was then through that, it's we started to be like people came to us as a reference. It's like, oh well, you're actually, even here in Quebec, there was a kind of politically significant impact to what we were doing, because agricultural policy, how we attribute land use, and there was a lot of debates in the media, and even like governments and political parties were taking notes. So it was very educational about what can be done when you bring people together.
Hmm.
But also I saw the limitations of that to a certain degree, because at the end of the day we were still in the business of selling online courses and acquiring clients for our different businesses. But then people from the government would ask us, okay, well, how many people uses your method? How many tons of carbon are removed? And I'm like, we're not a research institute, we're not lobbyists, we're still entrepreneurs who are running the day-to-day of a business.
Yeah. Focus on their objectives, and yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And when you look back today, what are you most proud of?
Well, I guess having a tangible impact.
Hmm.
Also, I'm proud. But one of the things, at some point, it started to get clear for me that I was meant to do other things eventually, and also my business partner and my vision started to diverge, and you go, and I think one of the things is really important, and I guess people who listen to the podcast will understand. It's even to get to the point you realize that you need to leave, or you need to sell, or you need to change course, like that's a process, and especially, so I was in that business for 7 years, and that was my babies, my energy. I put so much of it, I was so committed, day and night, thinking about it, dreaming about it. Every conversation somehow was connected to it. There was a whole world around me, the people. We even also, made a investment in real estate here. We moved the headquarters to the country, where we're going to have our own farm and produce our own content, and then so that was a whole thing. Like, so I would go to the office, the headquarters, and the whole life that's there. So learning to connect back to, like, okay, but what am I meant to do in this world? And what was interesting was that naturally, like, I feel like I attracted people around me who helped me through that transition, even when I wasn't even aware that I was going through that transition. But somehow these different people, mentors and people who were there to, advise me, just came out of nowhere, and I remember it was one of these people who, at some point, like, I was trying to find solutions for problems, but there's that in terms of, like, oh well, we were having issues. Every business is about solving problems. And I remember he was like, well, I think you're done, and it was just like, it was almost like it was it is I had this message a few times, but I didn't hear it. Then finally someone says, you're done, like,
Hmm.
you need to sell and you need to do your thing, and I was just like, so. But to get back to your question, so learning to recognize the signs, accepting help
Hmm.
was a big thing. And then I mean, there's the actual skills, the actual expertise, which is really important, and learning from failure. Small failure, bigger failures. Not everything works out, and that's being an entrepreneur. You learn from trial and error.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And then you were done. So can you tell us a little bit about that? The exit, maybe what
Yeah.
happened? What was the surprise?
Well, like any of these types of situation, like, once you make a decision, then there's a whole sequence of events that's beyond what you can even imagine. So there was a whole sequence of events, and there was negotiations, and there was other parties involved. It was pretty complicated. It was like a whole, because I said it's an ecosystem, but it was like
Hmm.
all this mix, because there's different entities that are connected to each other. They each have their own assets and resources and liabilities, and they're all connected to each other. And I guess people were, in this business world, will understand. So there was a negotiation. That's very stressful, because you feel like you're in this in between. You know, you can't throw yourself into new things because you're not complete. But also from the moment I made that decision, you know, you're removed from. I was removed from the day to day operation from that point. You know, and that was pretty traumatic in a way, because you go from being like super engaged with people every day. There's, you know, you got people expecting things from you, and you're keeping the balls going, and to suddenly like, oh, now you're by
Mhm.
yourself, you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Yeah.
but given all of this, we did come to an agreement, and other parties had to be got involved in financing and all this stuff, and we got to an agreement. And I remember it was, you know, winter, and you know, the day you signed and you received the, and it was just this feeling of like emptiness and like, what now? And I guess, you know, when we think about our topic with Next Mountain, it was directly that experience of like, who am I now? What's my direction? My body is full of adrenaline and stress. And I remember also going through, maybe some people will have experienced that, suddenly out of nowhere, all of this digestive issues,
Mm.
physically, like it was, you know, and then you feel like you go from being engaged with people and and having something to represent. You know, you go out in the wider world and you go to events and you meet people, and you always representing the entity that you're, you know, promoting, or, you know, you're responsible for. And suddenly like, I have nothing to represent. I'm just myself. I don't know what's my role. And people be like, oh well, you know, you meet new people and you can't help but talk about what you've done, but
Mhm.
you don't know, like, it's not who you are anymore. So it was a very disorienting phase. And then I remember the spring came, and then I spent like, I worked on my garden like a crazy person, and I got into like all of this landscaping stuff and working physically. Like, I mean, I could have hired landscapers, but I did it myself just because, I don't know, there was this energy that I needed to put out. And then there was times also this feeling of being exiled. And I think some, especially, it's one thing, I think people, when their whole business gets acquired by a third party, but when it's like, you know, the same people stay but you're the one who's not involved anymore, that could be very challenging, because you like you so so it was kind of navigating. And then the next winter, I decided to go on a trip, and I spent like a few months on the beach in Mexico, you know, in a very simple little cabin, and I had some friends who were staying in this little town on the coast of Mexico, and in Oaxaca. And then I took a sabbatical. Basically, I was just halfway through it, and I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing even through that time. So I spent like about 3 months in Mexico, and then I went to Kenya, and, you know, did a safari and everything. And I went to India. But even through that time, I was still kind of like reeling and almost like getting involved in new projects. But I, and then I would talk to people, be like, okay, now we need to start this. Okay, let's do it. And then finally, I'm like, oh, I'm not ready, you know. So it was a very disorienting time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
took a little, and that's the thing, I think, for people who are listening to this, who are about to go through that process, or going through that process. It's like, it just takes time. The more that you can accept it and give yourself completely to, like, you're going to need to unwind, you're going to need to heal, your body needs to, and then your mind, like, you need to create that space where you can kind of like allow to be like, who am I really without this role, without this company, without this to-do list, what's important to me. And it's not just like a, you're gonna like figure it out, like you're gonna think about it and figure it out. You have to live it out and allow it to unfold.
We've spoken of the different energies, right? Of what it takes when you're an entrepreneur, when you're go, go, go and to do versus the energy of the transition that maybe is a bit of a different space and different skills that are
Yeah.
required, maybe different routines and structures. So what muscles did you develop through that transition?
Well, I think for me specifically, and I think that's something that, because I had done it so like earlier in my life, changing your environment could be really helpful and useful. And I understand a lot of people don't have that luxury if they have kids, if they have a different situation, but any way you can put yourself in a completely different environment, I think that that's very helpful. I went through a phase where I was doing a lot of journaling and writing and meditation. I got into Pema Chodron, which is a great Buddhist teacher, and I was like having there's a practice called Tonglen, which is a type of Buddhist meditation, but basically like a visualization where you imagine yourself taking in the pain of the world inside of you and then breathing out compassion. And that may sound very simple, but it's so powerful because just doing a practice like that 15 minutes a day shows you, alters, if you do it for like a week, it really alters your state of being and your how you're able to be available. And I think especially when you're in a phase where, like when you're actively, let's say you're a CEO or you're running your company, or in a very, role with a lot of responsibility, like you're always like action, action, action. But also like being an entrepreneur is very often, or running a business is about solving problems. So you're always looking for like what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, where's the threat, where's the danger, so it can put you in this state of like like you're on guard, and taking the opposite route where you allow yourself to be like, I'm going to let things come inside of me and they're not a problem. I'm actually going to use that opportunity to send out something to be. So it creates kind of like a dynamic or a place, a disposition for being of service or for being of, even if it's just in an intention. And to me, that's how I would describe that shift, where going from like what's in it for me and what can I get out of things, and how, even if it's what's in it for us or what's in it for my company, or where can I find, what can I get, what's, like what can I give, what can I offer, I can contribute, how I can take part. And I think in order to unravel this constant seeking, to like, it needs to be slowly unraveled, and you need to do a small ways of practicing in order to get to the place of like, oh well, how can I offer, contribute, participate, and it's yeah, it's a real shift.
Yeah. And how does that maybe feed into Next Mountain? Do you want to express?
Yeah.
Well, maybe you want to tell the story, maybe
Yeah.
of the journey to it, and what's important now.
Yeah, well, so I spent about a year in a sabbatical where I traveled, and I went to Africa, I went to India, I went to France, and eventually I started again feeling like, okay, I need to rejoin the world. I need to, to take part in it. And I went, for me, like clarity is always the most important asset or things you can get to, because especially finding your way into something that's like unknown, it's just like the only way you get to clarity is through engagement. So I start coaching startup entrepreneurs through different accelerator programs that are here in Montreal. And I start, meeting with people, and people say, hey, you should meet so and so, let's go to this thing, or this person might need your help or something. So I was really much in that phase of like making myself available to take part, participate. And then through that process, a friend say, "Oh, there's these cool people who are having these regeneration dinners." And for me, the concept of regeneration was already in the background for me, because working in the field of small scale organic agriculture, it definitely is like nature based thinking, and the environmental world and regenerative agriculture, and how it's not just like a technique, but it's also a way of seeing the world, and it's a way of like living systems. How do
Yes.
we align ourselves to living systems?
Yes.
And when we think of like the big challenges of our time, a lot of us feel that there's a world that's falling apart and there's a new world that needs to emerge, or that's emerging. So I felt intuitively that I want to be part of things related to that, to like people who are thinking maybe in larger ways. And that's something that's always been very important to me, is like, and I think that's part of why I needed to transition out of what I was doing, is that as much as it's agriculture is very important, and I deeply respect it. I'm an avid gardener myself. I feel like the my role is about mindset, society, culture, how we see the world on a bigger scale. That was like not really sure where I want to play a part, but I want to play a part in that. So yeah, so I got invited to this get together, and that's where I met you.
Yeah.
And we started.
Dinner organizer. Hello.
Hello. And my friend's like, "Oh, this is girl Natalia. She's really cool. You should meet her." And we had coffee, and we had this natural that first it was this feeling of, oh, great person. I want to. What can we do together? And I think that was the starting point. What could we create? And we really talk about taking the time. We really took the time over many months meeting, and we got together in these office and doing, like, I don't know, like post-its and drawing and philosophy, and we start also engaging with people, different people in our environment, because also I had done a little in my outward journey. I had done some forays in the world of impact investment, and like, oh, do I want to become a venture capitalist and work, where is the leverage point, how can I have an impact? And I think that was also part of the question when we started wanting to do something together. It was like, where can we have the most impact together? And out of those conversations, we had different hypotheses and meeting with different people. And I think you and I eventually we got to that place, like, well, what if we could help exited entrepreneurs, and like you and I, to become a force for good, and to be a not only go through their transition, but also together what could a group of people like that's their high agency, they have a lot of capability, they might have some freedom in terms of financial resources. But one of the things that we really quickly heard from a lot of people we were interviewing was that, especially when you're an entrepreneur and you've built something and you exit,
Mhm.
what happens a lot is that then there's a few different kind of like scenarios. So either people like either they want to start another business, but sometimes what happens is that when people know, oh, you've done an exit, you have money, and then people hit you up to become an investor. And a lot of these people, they don't want to just be a check. They want to take part, they want to be an actor in the play, they want to play a role, they want to exercise. Because one of the things I know is that when you have skills, especially skills you've built through experience, it feels good to exercise them. So if you've built a skill of being able to make decision, get people together, take action, find a way, come to a conclusion, come to outcomes, that's something that feels good. So I think part of our discussion was like, what if we could help people to get to that place and give them also a, a way to engage into some of those topics, what the world needs, and not just from
Mhm.
a kind of virtue signaling way, not just from a, oh, well, I'm going to do philanthropy and write a check to save something, but to actually engage in that. Because part of also the world that you and I connected with is like, I was also really interested in learning who are those people who are thinking about the future and or are thinking about different ways of living, different ways of organizing society, different ways of, I had come from the world of, worked in agriculture, but in every sphere of life, the way of connecting to nature, the way of protecting nature, the way of approaching social problems or any sphere of life. And one of the things that, and I think, you work in some think tanks and different organizations, and there's great people doing great work, both on the theory level to, nonprofits that are on the ground starting initiatives in different places across the world. But systematically, though, a lot of those people or those initiatives are either underfunded, or the types of people, the culture inside of these worlds is not the same culture of like this high agency, action driven people that are driven to be entrepreneurs. So that was part of like the reflection, like, what if we could bridge those worlds together and create opportunities through that and turn these problems into opportunities?
bridge those two type of capabilities too. Yeah. So you spoke a lot of human contribution,
Mm.
and you're also a coach, right? So you coach entrepreneurs, and I think at some point it became clear that it was a bit too much trying to do coaching too many things at the same time. Can you say maybe a little bit more about that?
Well, yeah. So yeah, I'm a coach in different incubators, accelerators. Um, and I think one of the things is that I discovered is like you can't. Well, there's a I don't know, it's a saying that like you can't bring the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You know. So even if you see, like, I could meet with a startup or and give a diagnosis, right? They, like I say, you need to do A, B, and C for this reason. They might understand it conceptually, but for them to get to the place where it's true for them and they come to that conclusion, it's a whole other process. And also, like, the other thing is that, like, you can fix the content, but it doesn't change the context. And so, for example, if you're at, I work with an accelerator that is focused on impact enterprises and businesses. But if you're giving a for-profit company startup an imperative around impact, whether it's social, environmental, but they still exist in the same context and they still playing according to the same rules. And for me, I see, I can we could either have incremental, improvements, saying, well, if we could have like a company that's doing something, but that's not creating as much harm, because I think a lot of conventionally what is thought of as impact is like, well, you're operating according to the same business model, but your sustainability is like, oh well, you're not creating as much harm, or
Mhm.
or maybe your business model is circular, or you're not creating as many externalities, you're limiting the amount of externalities. Whereas a regenerative, if we were to think about a more regenerative way of doing things, it's not just doing less harm, it's actually creating a net positive, like in a living system. So 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 as much as I enjoy and appreciate working with those startups, and mostly for the people, because
Mhm.
I think anyone who sincerely wants to do good, to do something good in the world, um, needs to be supported, needs to be encouraged, um, needs to be given help, because the world needs more of it. And I think it's up to each of us to decide what does the world needs. But even asking, coming from a place of asking that question, what does the world needs, it draws you up to a bigger perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why, not to be grandiose, but I think a vision that could be shared by more people could actually create, a bigger paradigm shift. So I guess that's the ambitious vision with Next Mountain, is to be like what we need is not more individuals, though we do need it, but actually, if there's a power in a collective that could be greater than the sum of its parts. And this exists in systems, this exists in dynamics. And if we could shift something in terms of like what we understand as the world of business
Mhm.
in a greater sense, then maybe that's something worth doing.
Yeah, that's a great vision. And you said this is what you came back to do, to
Yeah.
contribute to the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to share a little bit more of what does the world look like with this, community contributing? What's the philosophy maybe behind this collective?
Well, good. That's a great
It's a big.
question. It's a big question. Well, I think for me, it's like it comes back to asking the question: what would a life-sustaining culture and society look like? And I
Mhm.
think each of us have a different way into that question. But I think a lot of us recognize that the mindsets and culture that has led up to where we are today collectively in the world has been important. And I think I'm not a good or bad type of person. I think things are useful at different points in different contexts.
Yes.
But I think a lot of us are aware that our current state of affairs, both socially, politically, economically, does not lead to sustaining life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's not, I don't even see like the ecology as not separate from the other things, because if you don't have a livable planet, there's no life. We can't live, there's no anything that could be separated. And so like some of the basic principles is that we live in an interconnected world, we're part of something greater than ourselves, or no man is an island, no man, no woman, no one is an island. So what does it look like? I think it's like um that each life has value inherent into it.
Mm-hmm.
And when we yeah.
Mais c'est très bon. C'est très bon. Jusque-là, mais t'es pas obligé d'en rajouter, en fait.
Ouais.
Je pense que
Yeah,
c'était déjà très bon.
each life, so each life has value.
Mm-hmm.
And what are the conditions that create the emergence of life and the
Mm-hmm.
sustaining of life, including cycles, because also everything exists in cycles.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to, so for example, I think one of the things that's baked into our conception of the world, or of a society, is growth, economic growth, and same for business. Because most people see, and especially the way businesses are started, funded, operated, they're really seen as like, you need to, if you're not growing, you're dying. Like that's the that's the ethos, right? But actually, if you look at a tree, or you look at or a forest, everything needs to grow and everything needs to die and be composted so it can become life for something else. So if we don't see each of our initiatives or projects or departments or as just individual, but collectively everything has cycles, and
Mm-hmm.
also for something to live, something else needs to die. So I think like we need to come more to create economic and social systems that are more representative of the way nature operates, and also for our own lives, because people are not machines. Just like there's 4 seasons, and in the winter you might slow down, and in the summer, or a plant grows, in the spring. So it's the same. Like, how could we create societies that honor the cycles of life that people go through, and that we can be more aligned, so that, and then, and I think what really deserves to be talked about is the one of the things I think it's important or relevant to understand is that often when we talk about regenerative, that people get like, what are you talking about, what does that mean, and I think one way of understanding complex concept like regenerative is to see it in comparison to something else. So I think one of the ways you can see the opposite of regenerative is extractive. So extractive means you're going to squeeze anything that's out of it, and you, by necessity, you're going to create an externality, you're going to create waste, you're going to create something, and someone has to pay. There's a price to pay for everything. It's just that someone else pays the price, or something else pays the price. In our current system, we see like we basically capture benefit, and we externalize the opposite of benefits. We externalize
The
harm,
ways or the, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
waste
The
or
cost.
harm, cost, into people, into the planet, into environments, into culture, society. So then the question is like, what could be something regenerative is not going to externalize. It's not like how can we squeeze stuff out of it, but actually how we create conditions for people to thrive, for environment to thrive, for societies to thrive,
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
communities to thrive.
Yeah.
And but that requires to not be so solely focused on growth, or solely focus on like quarterly results. Because I think, so for example, like all of corporate reality, and one of the things I'm proud of is I've never worked for a big corporation. I've been an entrepreneur, bootstrapped. I've never worked for a corporation. I'm incapable, I'm unemployable. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs who've been founders understand that. And that's part also of what is so hard when you exit your company and you want to do something. But especially when you're self motivated, you cannot fit into a situation that someone else dictates what you should and should not be doing. And one of the things for me that's really important is like, I want that for everybody. I want everybody to be able to find their own conclusion, or be motivated from something that's real for them, not because it's externally imposed onto them. I want people to be able to choose
Mm-hmm.
what life is important, what's important for me, what do I want to engage in, what am I attracted to, what do I feel compelled to take part in.
Yeah.
So
And that within the friction of the system, right?
and
Because
yeah,
it's not everything is possible, but how can you have a way to listen to that,
yeah,
put it into friction, action, and reaction so that we all evolve as a system? Yeah.
yeah, because it's like, and also based on needs,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
like everything needs something, right?
Mhm.
Children need to be fed, house needs to be cleaned, there's a lot of need out there, and but rather than systems of coercion or imposition, how can we what is the configuration of this we feeling that allows for the needs to be taken care of in a way that again creates the condition for
Yeah. And there's ways in which some communities put that in place, right? So it's not utopic, it exists, but it's how can we maybe bring it to the bigger picture, right? To the more mainstream, I guess,
yeah.
and how we organize ourselves around.
Yeah, and I think the scale is very important. One of the themes you and I been talking about is like place-based economics, and I think being able to be in a scale of configuration with other people where you can actually experience directly the impact of your work, and also see directly what's needed, rather than nation states or corporations, for example, which like
Hmm. Hmm.
the person's making the decision that impact millions of people is not in direct relationship with the impacts of those decisions. So anyway, that those are big, like,
Yeah,
ideas, big configuration or consideration. But so moving back to what we hope for Next Mountain is to create a collective of people that might in one way or another get into relating to those ideas, but also translating those ideas into initiatives, projects, and to be a force for good with other people. And maybe some people might see it as utopic to believe that existing entrepreneur can become this kind of force for good, but that's something that's the bet we're willing to make.
yeah. Remember the name of Douglas Dunskin, Kristen? She says if your dream you can achieve it in your lifetime, it's not big enough. So I guess
For
she's very.
sure. For sure. And also, what's interesting, so for people don't know, Douglas Tumpkin was the founder of North Face, um, and Esprit also. And also, one of the people I've had the great fortune of meeting is Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia. And it was really inspiring, not only to see his energy as a person, but also to understand the depth of the commitment that they've had, and how did that, especially with sustainability. Often people, I know how hard it is to try to take an existing business model or value chain and to try to change it, especially it's very complex, so, but I could just give an example. Like, he was explaining to us how when Patagonia did the first life cycle analysis, they realized that the biggest negative impact they were having was because of the pesticides used in growing cotton, which was the main fabric
Radiant, yeah.
of. So they were like, well, how can we have more organic cotton? And it was like, even if there was not supply, there was not enough organic cotton being produced. So it's like, okay, well, how can we help some of those farmers who are often poor in India, and women farmers, to change their practices to to grow organic cotton rather than conventional. But then the obstacle they encountered is that even if they wanted to help them at a certain scale, is that most of these women cotton farmers in India were illiterate, so they could not read and they could not learn and they could not follow written instructions. So what they did is that they invested in literacy programs in India for women farmers in order to help, so that they could be able to help them transition to organic cotton production. So for me, it was just such an illustration of like the depth of the commitment to like, because we live in a world that we're constantly sold that there's this magic key or this special, this one thing you're going to do, it's going to change everything. But the reality of like actually doing change is like, you start from one place and then you dig and there's a deeper reason and there's a deeper problem. It's connected to something else, to something else, to something else. And it's never the big thing that you do and everybody claps or everything, the world changes. It's more like, how can you stick with something with this curiosity and seeking solutions and wanting to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. And for me, that story just exemplifies that, and to see where Patagonia is today in terms of even like the legal
ownership
mechanism. I think it's an example for the whole world. And some might have even legitimate criticism about Patagonia today, but in terms of like an example of you know following a certain path and not giving up and not being content with just doing a little less bad, I think it's the best example we have today.
Yeah, great. Those examples are very inspiring. So Marie-France, is there anything else you'd like to say to our audience? Anything we haven't discussed, or an invitation maybe?
Yeah, well, we're just getting started. This is the beginning. We've decided to do this podcast for me and Natalia to introduce ourselves. The invitation is really like join whatever, join a movement. We want to create whatever. No, but the invitation is to join us, play a role, join a
enter in
movement,
relationship.
enter in relationship. And what we want to say is that, like, if you got something to offer and you want to co-create with us, we're more than willing to engage with you. And yeah, a better world is possible.
A better world is possible.
Yes.
Merci beaucoup, Marie-France. Thank
you,
you.
Natalia.